觉得我们是最强的。
18个，来吧！恭喜！
Almost a year ago, these 5 players went off to the Arthur Ashe Stadium in New York City to have a shot at the $30 million prize pool. However, a year onwards, these players have all vanished, nowhere to be found within Fortnite's competitive scene. The same situation was being mirrored across Chinese competitive Fortnite, and there was nothing you could do about it. This is the tragic tale of Chinese competitive Fortnite.
And he's gonna get the double! He's gonna get the double and the revive on KBB. And there was some delicious shockwave grenades that just slid down the ramp.
Fortnite's Chinese servers launched in July of 2018. It quickly caught some attention of major esports organizations, and soon teams were being picked up. In fact, EDG, a huge Chinese tier 1 organization, picked up a squad on the day of the public release of the Chinese servers. The competition from overseas clearly drove some traffic towards Fortnite's way, and there was this belief within a professional system being crafted and being brought to this game very soon. Therefore, practice was very institutionalized, and everything was put in order for these players to have the best practice environment, the most professional practice environment before Fortnite announces any overseas campaigns. Much like traditional esports, LANs were the focus of competitive Fortnite in China too. It took around 2 to 3 months for the first major LAN event to take place in China, the Stanley Convention. This convention gave China a first real taste of what competitive Fortnite at its peak is like within the Asian region, and it paved way for future competitions in China. Then a whole slew of LANs began to be held. The Stanley Convention saw a duo get crowned and a squad get crowned, and TGA followed the trend of playing the duo format. TGA was another LAN that featured 2 rounds of online qualifying and then a finals on LAN in which AG won the duos competition. From there, another duos competition named 一带一路 was held, in which Weibo won, and one half of the Weibo duo would then sign on to Newbie to become one of the greatest Fortnite players China's ever produced. And whilst local LANs were fun and all, and great competition, those wouldn't stack up against international LANs in which they competed against other regions. So, AO 2019 came along, and after a fearsome competition in order to qualify for the event took place online, EDG and Newbie were meant to send 4 players in total towards the event. Unfortunately, they did not manage to perform at the international environment, and although 2 out of the 4 would go on to use that LAN experience in order to help them qualify for World Cup, what they didn't manage to do was gain China a foothold within the world of international Fortnite right away. The same story then echoed itself with WE's duo. Lil J and 07 traveled over to Poland in order to attend the ESL Katowice event. Unfortunately, they also performed poorly in solos and duos, and they were also unable to convert that valuable LAN experience into anything of any worth. Putting Katowice behind them, Chinese Fortnite had something else to look forward to. World Cup loomed. China has its own regional qualifier roadmap, and instead of playing with Asia, Chinese players who chose to stay on the mainland would get their own online qualifier of 3 rounds and then qualify to a LAN in Chengdu, in which the top duo and the top solo would then go on to New York City. Organizations were now faced with the decision: do they move out to Asia in order to compete for those spots, or do they stay within China in order to try and fight for the Chinese LAN spots? Whilst organizations such as Newbie went out to Asia to dominate and then go on to take some spots, lots of organizations, tier 1 organizations, chose to stay in China, as some considered it too much hassle and others considered it a more logical decision. Chengdu rolled along, and WE's Yuang and KBB and FPX's Evil Mare qualified for New York City. They would go on to fight for China, and they would go on to fight for their own personal glory. Unfortunately, in vain. Whilst all the competitors gave valiant efforts at the Big Apple, none of them managed to secure any extra cash or gain China a foothold within international Fortnite. The same story has repeated itself once again. China gets its own track to qualify for these international events, and when it comes down to it, they throw.
Skeptic now at 150 HP, eats the stink grenade to the face again, and with only 2 builds left, Clicks now knocked, and nades flying on in. Oh, the 150! The 150 makes the difference! Can Skeptic clutch right now? Might be a difference maker in this one. Wall in place, not gonna happen as of yet. Tries to take a shot, oh my gosh! The clutch from Skeptic.
Soon after World Cup, Trios was announced, and finally Chinese players could actually compete online against Asian players. If you didn't know, before World Cup, there weren't many cups held apart from the Black Card Cup, the Scallywag Cup and the World Cup Warm-Up, and those were the only cups in which Asian players could actually compete against the Chinese players in proper competition. And because China has its own competitive roadmap during the World Cup, China was not able to compete against their own continent for over 10 weeks. So, once Trios rolled along, Chinese players had something to prove. Here and there, Chinese players would win cash cups until eventually FNCS finals rolled along and Chinese players secured 5th and 6th. Unfortunately, behind this facade of successful placements, Chinese orgs were slowly disbanding. It was simply unsustainable. Although the money was lucrative, it wasn't enough to persuade a lot of organizations to stay in. Organizations disbanded one after the other until eventually, during the squads era, there were only 3 to 4 left. After the squads era finished, another unsuccessful rounds of placement were handed out. Almost all of the organizations would then go on to disband between the point where FNCS squads ends and the point where the Australian Open happens. Now you might be thinking, why is the Australian Open so important for these organizations? That's because the Chinese qualifiers were being held once again and 4 players were meant to be sent over once again. This was the same story but with a different ending. Whilst last time the Australian Open provided very unideal results for the Chinese players, org investment skyrocketed after Australian Open had took place. That was because of the World Cup. However, this time around, although the Chinese players have managed to produce significantly better results and even broke the Asian record for the highest placement in a major international LAN event, it just wasn't enough. Once Duo FNCS rolled around, Fun Plus Phoenix was the only organization truly still there. And even then, just when things might finally start looking up, coronavirus hit. You see, the Fun Plus Phoenix squad was going to go over to either North America or Europe in order to boot camp, in order to try and compete at a higher level and for a better prize pool. The prize pool was always the problem. It was simply unsustainable, even being at the top, to maintain a whole team house for a large squadron with the Asian prize pool, which simply cowers below the European prize pool and the North American prize pool. And on the 28th of March 2020, Fun Plus Phoenix disbanded the Fortnite division. It came as a shock to everybody as they were still performing, and a lot of the players, even if they were still swinging at the top, had no choice but to leave the scene. Today, with Solo's FNCS announced for Season 3 of Chapter 2, and Trio's FNCS announced for Season 4 of Chapter 2, things still aren't looking great. Only one player managed to qualify for the finals of the Solo FNCS Invitational during the past season, and things still aren't looking good even so. Most members or ex-members within the Fortnite scene in China will know the problem, and they will give you 3 different solutions. One solution is to host another World Cup in which there is another incentive for Chinese organizations to invest in it, such as the Chinese roadmap, in which there was its own LAN and there were guarantees for Chinese spots. That was something we're fighting for. 2. China officially passes Fortnite as a legal game, and Tencent can start finally profiting off of the game within China. Some of you might not know, and I won't get too in depth on this, but I'll leave a link in the description on a synopsis that I did on the issue, is that Chinese Fortnite isn't actually profitable, and therefore there's no real reason to push it, and any dreams of a professional league within China that is Chinese ran, or any sort of competition that is Chinese ran, simply cannot happen. 3. You increase the Asian prize pool significantly. There needs to be some large sum of money on the line consistently in order for orgs to properly feel the need or the urge to invest within the game again, because currently there's no real reason for these organizations to invest if they're going to be making a very small sum of money regardless, and they're not even profiting from a PR standpoint because Fortnite simply isn't a popular game in China. In fact, a lot of people haven't even heard of it. So that's it. That's the story of Chinese competitive Fortnite. A tragic tale outlining a region that's doomed to fail in the future unless Epic makes changes. Due to unforgiving circumstances, players simply cannot sustain themselves as a player without an organization funding them and backing them. There's no guarantee. And for those who want to turn esports into a job for themselves, sustainability is everything that these players want to count on. What that translates into is no org, no sustainability. That's the unfortunate state which Chinese Fortnite is stuck in, and this loop will continue until it is broken by some outer force. Thank you for making it through this video, and if you enjoyed being educated on this type of content, please do try and drop a like and subscribe below. Leave a comment about any questions that you have. I'll try to get around to as much of them as possible surrounding this complicated topic.